You know that song, start at the very good beginning. It's a very good place to start.
Yes, it is. Let's start with ABC. All
There
right.
you go.
So, well, you know who I am. I'm Maureen, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Workplace Learning and Performance Group, which has been in business about 11 years now, going on 12. But
Okay.
as I look back over my history and my career, it's funny. I had my first job, I don't know if you call it, technically was as a paper delivery person
Oh,
or
okay.
paper girl, right?
I
That
did
was,
I did the same thing.
yeah, I don't know if I would actually call it a job because I was in middle school and I had to ride my bike and so it was very physical. Talk about the difference in the workplace, right? It was very physical
Right.
because I had to fold the papers, put them in my bag and drive my bike around the neighborhood.
Well,
And
I
then
call it a job, Maureen, because we did work and we did get paid for it. Not a
yes,
lot, but we got paid.
exactly, exactly. And but it's interesting. I was chatting with one of my or my sister made a comment on one of my Facebook posts because I in my work now, just to juxtapose the two different experiences, I don't consider myself a salesperson, although I have my own business and it's reliant on me being able to sell the new client or pitch them on a project or whatever.
Right.
But my sister posted, she said, well, you've always been a salesperson. And I never, ever thought I was a salesperson. But she said, remember when you were maybe 8 or 9, we had a huge avocado tree on our property, and I would fill up my wagon with avocados and go door to door selling avocados to the
Oh, be
neighbors,
darned.
5 for $1 or whatever.
Right.
Um, and just because, my family had 5 children, both my parents were teachers, we didn't have a lot of extra cash. And that was what I did for, candy money to take my money and go spend it on candy at the local convenience store. I was really wise. But,
Uh-huh.
but anyway, the reason I share that is because it becomes relevant to the conversation as my career evolved. But
Okay.
my first job out of high school, if you would, was at SeaWorld here in San Diego, and I
Okay.
worked in the food services industry, or in one of the restaurants there.
I'm
And
familiar with that.
yeah, yeah, I ended up learning a lot about careers and work and promotional opportunities in that job.
Uh-huh.
And similar to your first job, we had to wear a uniform, right? Because when you're in an environment representing an organization to the public, they want a certain look.
Right.
And the uniform was hideous. The look was horrible, but it was the look the organization chose. Um, but one of the really early lessons in my career was that of being able to communicate what you're looking for, right? And in fact, the story I often share is there was a promotional opportunity. I was just a frontline food service person serving the food, and there was a lead food service person available,
Uh-huh.
uh, a lead food service assistant, I think it was called. It was a promotion, and I remember I worked hard, I took initiative, I went above and beyond to really demonstrate my passion and desire for the job to my boss. And then all of a sudden, my good friend Karen got the job. And I was confused. I said to my boss, I said, wait a second, how come Karen got the job? I mean, I do this, I show up early, I do all of this work. And he says, oh, I didn't know you were interested in the job.
You
And
never
I
told
think
him?
I never told him.
Oh
I
my gosh.
assumed I assumed that he would notice that the reason I worked so hard was because I wanted to get a promotion. I
Oh,
never even had the conversation until it was too late and the job was given to someone else. But that was a really early lesson for me in being able and never assume, first of all,
right.
but being able to put it out there. It's almost that pitch, that sales pitch to say, here's what I want, here's what I'm looking for, here's what I have to offer to the organization. And so many people, I think, fall into the same trap I did, that you you assume they're going to notice and assume that translates to you want to grow within the organization, but it doesn't always, right? And that was a really early lesson for me that I have shared with probably thousands of people as I've done my corporate training and development over the years is have the conversation, right?
Right.
And in the American culture or in other cultures around the world, it's probably similar. You don't have that conversation, or there's certain protocol you need to follow, and or being aware of the importance though for you as an individual in today's day and age in the
Mhm.
workplace and even in the workplace 40 years ago, you still have to find that courage within
Right.
yourself
Right.
to have that conversation.
Do you think, Maureen, that in some cultures that it would be seen as being too forward to let it be known that you want something more beyond what you currently have?
Absolutely. I'm sure it is, and it's probably almost taboo that you don't have that conversation.
And
So
then
then
on
the
another
question,
level, isn't it also gender sensitive? In other words, females tend to be in many societies less or more reluctant to step forward and let it know what they want, as opposed to it's seen as a sign of macho-ness in a male to come forward and let them know. I'm just curious your
yes.
thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, that's, I think, something that many women have had to reconcile in their own mind is how do I advance in my career without being viewed as an aggressive um go-getter
Hmm.
in the negative sense, right? Because
Exactly.
yes, women when we try to achieve something, it can be viewed very differently than when a man does.
Right.
And on that thought and on that note, I guess is people look at what I've been able to accomplish in my career. You know, I own my own business and I've been, you know, I have my doctorate and I've gotten international level awards and written 5 books and all of that. And they're like, wow, you've accomplished so much. And really what's interesting and what
Do
I
they put a
don't
caveat on the end? You've accomplished so much for a woman.
know, not
Good.
usually, not
Good.
usually.
Good.
However, what I often don't say is the reason I have done so much was to be able to set myself apart because I'm a woman.
Okay.
Because I
Very
know in order to compete, and especially compete in business as a business owner, is there's got to be something that I've done differently or better or more unique or whatever in order to compete with, you know, other businesses, perhaps even men, but I don't view it as competing with men. I view it as working from that disadvantaged spot of being a woman, and people
okay.
will automatically dismiss you. Hate to say it, and
Interesting.
still in today's day and age, but if you have a good set of credentials behind your name, it's harder to dismiss you. At least that's my belief.
Yeah, I
Because
think you're right. What's interesting is even as a young worker after I got out of the Navy, I had a similar feeling, and I'm not a woman, by the way, but I had a similar feeling because a lot of the folks that I was working with had an MBA, and I didn't. And I always felt that that was a stumbling block. So I went and got an
true,
MBA. I wasn't a different person afterwards, but like you said, I had a credential that differentiated me from everybody else in the crowd. And I didn't realize, I thought it was important. I didn't realize how really important it was until I accomplished it. Suddenly doors opened that would never have opened before. So I really
exactly.
appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the each level of education does that for you, opens up doors that weren't there before, whether it be your high school diploma, which can be disabling if you don't have one.
Right.
For in some career fields, not having a bachelor's degree is disabling. And then once you start to work in more of that professional capacity, which I had done at the university or in human resources, having a master's degree again sets you apart or
Hmm.
disables you from competing effectively.
Right.
And then for me, getting the doctorate, it was as a business owner, it was very purposeful to say, here's Dr. Ori, which I have learned in working some organizations that it also can work against you because now you've achieved this status that some view as threatening. So it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? Like, well, it's, but I think in the industry I work in, which is in the knowledge industry,
Right.
essentially, yeah, I think most of the time it works to my advantage.
Oh, good.
Um,
So
but what
that was a big lesson for you, it sounds like.
It was. And what's interesting, I think, when we look at the evolution of the workplace today is, and especially with COVID and virtual learning and remote workplaces, which is I know something we will be talking
Right.
about. But what is the role of education going to be in the future?
Hmm.
So, I mean, with colleges opening and closing and opening and closing, and realizing that it's still very vulnerable, that face to face environment is still very vulnerable, then that makes people question. And I have this in my own family. I have a high scholarly academic child who is 21 years old and finishing her master's degree at George Washington University.
Right.
I have an artist who is a brilliant artist. He has his bachelor's degree, but he still lives at home because he's not very much of a go-getter when it comes to finding a job, but he
Right.
loves to do his art. And then I have another child who has struggled with school, has always hated it and really struggles. And she's the one who's questioning, like, why should I go to school? What's the value of a bachelor's degree? Can't I get a job and grow? And there's lots of examples of thought leaders who have never completed college. But
Right.
I think in today's day and age, it's going to be an interesting conversation about what does the society still views that growth in academia as, you know, stars in your resume, but
Right.
it'll be interesting to see how that changes.
Yeah, I wish her luck on that, because if you were to look at the job market as a pyramid, the higher you go up in that pyramid, the more expectations are of the background in your education.
Yep.
We can always call out those few and far between Bill Gates examples, but
Yeah.
in general, to aspire to that high level job attainment, it is an educational spiral up, not down.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So
And
going from your first job, where did you go from there? You
so
started at
that's
SeaWorld.
yeah, I started at SeaWorld and then was going to college. And it was all here in San Diego. I never really left San Diego throughout my life except to travel on business,
Hmm.
which was pretty extensive. But as I was working and going to school, I also got a second job as a waitress at Farrell's Ice Cream Parlor. I
Oh yeah.
worked as a waitress, and that's where I learned to do public speaking essentially because I was horrible at public speaking.
Oh
I got a
yeah.
C minus in speech 103 in college. I
That's
really
interesting.
I was horrible, but it was having to, get the audience's attention at the restaurant and make a birthday announcement. It was silly, but that's where I at least got over my fear of public
Uh,
speaking. Um, and then and that was all when I was, in that 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years of going to school and working. It was all more food service, right?
mhm.
Restaurants and waitress kind of jobs.
Okay.
Then when I got my bachelor's, I knew I wanted, here's all and my bachelor's is in psychology. The only focus I had at the time is I knew I wanted to work with people.
Okay.
And I had realized, and so I got a bachelor's degree in psychology. And really, that's one of the jokes of academia is what are you going to do with a bachelor's degree in
Exactly.
psychology?
If there ever
So
was a degree that required a PhD, it's always been felt that it was psychology.
exactly, exactly. So I ended up getting a master's. I graduated in '85 with my bachelor's, got married, and it's actually, I think it was at that time. No, it wasn't then. I was still working in food service or what have you. And I went pretty quickly into getting my master's because I knew that if I wanted to work with people that I'd need to have that credential of a master's degree.
Okay.
So I got a master's in education. My emphasis at the time was in counseling. And that's when I realized I don't want to listen to people's problems for a living. Sorry, maybe I'm not empathetic enough, but I did have this aha moment in my master's program. Like, I do not want to sit
Yeah.
and listen to
Yep.
people's problems because I tend to be very action oriented. And my thought was, and I would be a horrible counselor because if someone's telling me, oh, my husband's an alcoholic and he's abusive, and I'm like, well, leave him. Like,
There's the
what
answer.
are you doing? Probably not a great counselor.
Right.
So I shifted my focus actually when I had that realization. I shifted to career counseling, which is much more
Okay.
tangible and forward thinking as opposed to backward thinking. And that's kind of what started me on this path of working in career development, which then turned into human resources because I left SeaWorld for a while, and it was after I got my master's. There was a job opening. I was still in touch with some folks. There was a job opening in human resources at SeaWorld to do recruitment, selection, training, like new employee orientation for SeaWorld. And since I had my master's and I was looking for a more professional opportunity, I went back to SeaWorld, but now to work in human resources,
Gotcha.
which I ended up doing there for about 5 years.
So
And
at your time at SeaWorld, Maureen, if you could, did you see changes in the workplace over that time period that you could kind of call out that you saw an evolution going on in the workplace?
oh, absolutely. And in fact, one of the biggest shifts, and this is really relevant to the corporate culture, if you would, right? And we especially the American culture and a bit about geography. What was interesting is at the time when I was working there initially and when I went back to work there in human resources, the company was owned by a publishing company, an education publishing company called Harcourt Brace and Jovanovich,
Huh?
HBJ for short.
Familiar.
HBJ, SeaWorld was intended to be an educational park, not necessarily a theme park, which is why they never had roller coasters until later, which is
Right.
when the culture shifted, right? HBJ got bought out, and well, Anheuser-Busch bought the park.
Okay.
And so they brought roller coasters, beer gardens. They brought kind of the amusement park of it and changed the culture of the company from education to entertainment. Huge culture change.
Yeah, that would be. Now, how about the treatment of the animals in that environment? Did that change in terms of focusing more on how the animals could be shown as opposed to how the animals could entertain?
No, that remained pretty much the same. What changed was the type of additional things they added to the park. Like
Gotcha.
when HBJ owned it, there was a huge section of land that was dedicated to, interestingly now, a map of the United States. And it had all of the states painted and had their capitals and some landmarks and so forth. And you could literally walk from state to state and you could talk to your child about geography.
I'll be darned.
That was made a pathway and the beer garden and the Clydesdales were housed at SeaWorld for a while. So
I
the
remember
Budweiser,
I remember seeing them in the early years. Yes, they were I can't remember exactly where they were, but I remember there was a stall and you could see
yep,
the horses.
yep, yep. And that's where they housed the horses. They had a whole paddock, if you would, for all of the
Hmm.
Budweiser Clydesdales. And so I think because they had the Clydesdales, having the care and uptake of animals essentially did translate to just continued good care.
Okay.
Um, good. One thing I guess that did change was a little more visibility. And what I mean by that was the previously the dolphins you couldn't pet them.
Oh, okay.
And then there was more access to the animals, which was good and bad, right?
Hmm.
There's I won't go into I mean, there's some weird people out there
Oh, yeah.
that are we'll just leave it at that. Uh, and so that was one thing that might have changed. There was still the good quality care, and absolutely, SeaWorld, I believe, has always had great care of their animals.
Did they always,
Blackfish.
Maureen, did they always spend a lot of time in this in cat saving the animals, that were hurt on the beach and so on. Is all
Always have,
part of it?
always have.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the documentary Blackfish that I think really has completely changed the culture again because they were in such a spotlight, incorrectly in the spotlight, in
I
my
agree.
opinion.
I agree.
Because they have always, ever since the beginning of SeaWorld, they always had an animal rescue squad that would go out to the beaches and the
Mhm.
oceans. And Hubs Research Institute is owned by SeaWorld, or was owned by SeaWorld, to really further research and education on sea life and the
Okay.
ocean and all of that. So,
So some of the
um,
core values survived through these transitions, it sounds like.
yes,
Okay.
they did. They the foundational ones did, but then I think the need to generate revenue and
Right.
make it more of an attraction. I mean, SeaWorld was an attraction, but it couldn't compete with Disneyland at Knott's Berry Farm, for
Right.
example, or Magic Mountain, because there wasn't a roller coaster.
Gotcha. See, now the
And
difference
so,
between me going to SeaWorld today and my younger children going is I go to see the animals, they go to ride the rides.
yeah,
And I can say, go ride the rides. I'm going to go see the dolphins and I'm going to go see the walruses and I'm going to see the penguins and all. And that's what I thoroughly enjoy. You know, I'll
yeah,
ride a rider once in a while, but the reason I go to SeaWorld is the animals.
absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
interesting. How
In,
about
in,
legal changes that occurred over that time in terms of laws that came into effect that affected the workplace? One example would be minimum wage. I know it must have gone up dramatically over the time that you were
it did. You know, it's interesting. This is kind of building upon the culture change with Anheuser-Busch, but I thought it would be relevant that when Anheuser-Busch bought SeaWorld, and I was working in management and human resources then at the time,
there. Hmm.
they were really surprised as they did an analysis of the um, whole company. You know what people are paid, what kind of revenue there is. They're looking at the ledger, right, to see
Right.
how's this asset that we just purchased. They were surprised. Anheuser-Busch was surprised at how low the pay was comparatively to
Really?
other theme parks that like Busch Gardens or whatever that they also own.
Mhm.
And they said the cost of living in San Diego was higher than elsewhere, but your pay is lower. And we're like, yeah, that's called the sunshine factor, right? We get paid in sunshine. Doesn't pay the bills, doesn't feed the children. But it was interesting is the corporation and Anheuser-Busch did across the board. I believe it was a 15% pay increase to every
Wow.
single employee in the organization.
That's big when you're taking over a new asset and not knowing the effect it might have long term. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it had very positive effect for everyone at the park, right? That was put them in the good graces. But
That
um,
did they benchmark against Disneyland and other theme parks here in Southern California?
yep, and
And
we
they
were
were still,
lower than everyone.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting. So that was, I think, for me, a lesson in economics and large scale, enterprise systems.
Hmm.
For them to be willing to look at that and take positive action instead of keep that a secret.
Right, right.
Said a lot about the organization. But thinking back to some of the laws that were, so I got my master's in 88 and started working at SeaWorld in I think 89 and worked there for about 5 years or so. Um, the ADA was passed, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed.
Okay.
And so that became part of the human resources conversation about how do we accommodate individuals with disabilities in a theme park area, safely. So there was a
And
lot of
I was
cons-
probably talking about both employees as well as customers too, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Interesting.
And so there were physical changes to the park with ramps and access. There were, a lot of the folks in human resources needed to be trained on interviewing individuals with disabilities. And this ended up becoming a passion of mine, which led to my first book on successful staffing in a diverse workplace.
Uh-huh.
Because what I found is that all of my fellow comrades and partners in human resources, whenever someone with a obvious physical disability came in for an interview or someone who was a little bit different,
Right.
They're like, "Hey, Maureen, you interview them."
They
'Cause
didn't know how to do it.
they did not have a comfort level. There was more fear than there was
Oh my
anything
God.
else.
Oh
Yeah,
my
it was
God.
really, and I only noticed this kind of in retrospective, and then I connected the dots later because my next job after SeaWorld, I actually was working at San Diego State, working in career counseling, career development, which is what my original goal was, getting that master's. But I managed a program for students with disabilities, and I did career coaching and job placement for students with disabilities now, but in the academic environment.
Wow.
But
I bet
my
that was rewarding.
it was extremely rewarding. I'm still in touch with many of the students that I counseled back then, and
Fascinating.
it was great. What was interesting is I found that my role, having worked in human resources for 5 years, and now really on the other side of the fence, helping people find jobs who are disadvantaged because of a disability, it was a perfect match because I could
Hmm.
see both sides
Right.
of the coin. And what was interesting is when I was interviewing for that job at San Diego State, and I think in my internship, I'm sorry, in my master's program, I had done an internship at San Diego State. So I knew some of the folks there in the career office. And so the director had called me and told me I need to interview for this job,
Well,
which
that's
is
nice.
that was really good. That was really good. But in the context of that interview, she asked me, she says, "What kind of experience do you have working with individuals with disabilities?" And my first gut reaction was, "I don't have any experience," but I was smart enough not to say that. Because as I reflected right there in the middle of the interview, I thought, you know what? I grew up exposed to people who were different because my mother was a special ed teacher.
Oh,
And,
okay.
so I'd go visit her at her school, and she worked with developmentally disabled kids and from preschool on up. And the family, ended up working together to create a square dance club, if you can imagine, for, the her students and
Uh-huh.
individuals to teach them how to do square dancing, but everyone had developmental disabilities. So to me, that became normal,
Right.
right? To be exposed to individuals who are
And
different, which
so
is
as in retrospect, you identified it that, but as part of your lifestyle, you said that's just the way it should be, right? That's
yes,
interesting.
absolutely.
That's
And
interesting.
somehow my colleagues in human resources picked up on that before I even did.
Right.
I was very comfortable with someone who was different, and I hadn't really put it together until I was sitting there in that interview. I'm thinking, that's why. Like it all kind of clicked together. And thankfully, I was able to share that with the panel of interviewers at the university, and I got the job and ended up managing the most successful program of its kind in the state of California for about five
Wow.
years.
So
And
what were the factors that made it successful, Maureen?
couple things. And so for purposes of that career evolution, I go from corporate America, if you would, to
Academia.
academia. Right? So I have a weird sorted path, I guess. But what made that program successful was probably three main factors, I think, now in hindsight. One was my comfort level, and I was totally okay working with anyone, no matter what
Right.
challenge they were facing. The second one was that ability to have had 5 years of human resources experience. And at SeaWorld, we would interview literally thousands of people every year
Right.
because we had such high volume. So I knew human resources. I knew how people thought, how you navigate and how you interview, right? What's that HR person looking for when they interview you? So I could coach and counsel my students on how to navigate that successfully.
Well, going
And
back to SeaWorld, with the ADA program, was part of the ADA program implementation at SeaWorld hiring more people within the disabled community.
yes, yes.
So
In
you had
fact,
great experience right there too, wouldn't you? Okay, I get
yes.
it now. Okay.
Yes, exactly. In fact, we partnered with a few different community organizations to be able to have individuals with disabilities get hired and have a job coach along the way
Okay.
to increase their success. And I was the one. pushing SeaWorld to say, yes, we need to do this. Yes, we need to partner with this organization. And so that ended up working out very well. And I was able to coach my colleagues on how you interview, how you have that discussion about reasonable accommodations and how you can be more inclusive in that process.
Now, in doing that, I'm curious about this aspect now myself personally. In doing that, were you inclined to ask the people you were interviewing, what accommodations do you think you need, as opposed to telling them the accommodations you were going to provide?
Absolutely. In fact, that's the best way to have the conversation. And what I would coach, and I still coach people on when I have the opportunity, is the conversation in the interview has to be centered around the expectations of the job itself. Like here's the job description, here's the essential functions of the job. And
Right.
the question, the only legal question we can ask is, can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without accommodations? And if the answer is no, you can't perform the essential functions of the job. What are you doing here? If the answer is yes, and I need accommodations, well, let's have a discussion around those
Gotcha.
accommodations.
Okay.
So here's a great example. One kid I was interviewing, he said, yes, I can, but I need an accommodation. I need to be able to sit down. He had had back issues, had back surgeries, even as a 16-year-old kid. It was something he had struggled with all his life.
Right.
And he had a great personality, and he was great in the interview. And I'm thinking, can we accommodate that in the food service, right? And then I'm thinking, because safety is important, and we have 12 restaurants in this park.
Right.
I'm thinking there's got to be a restaurant in there that could accommodate this. So I said, well, here's the environment. You could, if you're in a walk up window restaurant where there's high traffic there in the kitchen, putting a stool there for you to sit on would become a safety issue. So that wouldn't work. And so we kind
Mhm.
of talked through a number of different restaurant environments and came up with a cafeteria environment. And as the customers are leaving, they stop at a cashier who's kind of out in the lobby, and the cashier rings them up and they pay and they leave. It's in line with a queue, right? And I thought, they're in this tiny little booth. We could put a chair there very safely.
Right.
But here's the funny thing. So we got this guy a chair, and now guess what? The kid who's perfectly able next to him in the
Wants a
cashier
chair
booth,
too.
I want a chair. So guess what? SeaWorld bought, I don't know,
Two
40 or
chairs.
50 chairs. Yeah, everyone got a chair when it was safe to do so, because why
Okay.
not? And I think that's one of the cool things about accommodations is you realize you might be accommodating this individual because of a disability, but it's just the right thing to do
Right.
also.
Well, the other thing, just, kind of a sidebar on that would be that the fellow with the disability may see, I just established a new trend here.
Exactly.
So
He did.
he felt part of the group as opposed to apart from the group.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
very
Yeah.
good. That's cool.
Yeah.
So at San Diego, academia versus corporate, what were some significant differences there from a culture, ethics type of thing? Because to me, academia is an environment that's just unto itself. It really is.
It completely is. In fact, there was a great conversation I had with a colleague because when you're in corporate culture, you're always doing it. You've got to you're performing. They
Right,
look at performance. You need to make sure you're doing your job and then some. And that was that kind of go-to pushy culture I was in
right,
at a theme park. But the so I get to the university, and I was waiting for a student. There's a couple different stories, right? But I was waiting for a student to arrive for her appointment. And, at 15 minutes, she's now 15 minutes late, 20 minutes late. So I was chatting with another colleague while I was waiting for her to arrive. And I look at the clock. I'm like, okay, it's 20 after. Clearly, she's not coming to the appointment. I said, I need to go back to my office and get to work. And my colleague says, nah, you work for the state now.
oh
Relax.
no, oh no.
Let's go get a cup of coffee. And I'm thinking, oh, oh my God. I mean, that really kind of encapsulates the difference in culture. He's like, yeah,
Ah,
you don't have to work so hard. He says, don't work so hard. You don't have to push so hard. Just relax. Let's go and get a cup of coffee.
interesting. Very
So
interesting.
I did, but in the spirit of getting to know and build this relationship with a colleague, but at the same time I'm thinking, wow, what a difference in culture,
And that
right?
wasn't you either, was it?
No, no, that took some getting used to.
I'll bet.
This same gentleman told me before the first staff meeting, we had a Monday morning staff meeting, and he says before the staff meeting, he says, okay, now here's the rules. I don't want you to ask any questions. I don't want you to share any new ideas. And if you do, I'm going to touch the side of my nose. And if you see me touching my nose, that means shut up, you're asking too many questions. And I'm thinking, is this what, hazing for the new staff member at the university?
Oh my
I
God.
didn't believe him
Yeah, I wouldn't have either.
until we get in the staff meeting. And I'm what? Asking questions, sharing ideas. I'm like the new blood touching the side of his nose. And I'm thinking, you weren't kidding.
Oh
And
my
that's just
gosh.
another sign of, and he said, because the boss is going to take that and run with it, and the meeting is going to go 3 times longer than it needs to, because now we're going to be talking about this thing that you brought up, so shut up. And it was really and the message to me was the culture of perhaps not trying to be the best you can be, and that was a little disturbing.
Well, it also sounds like a little bit of maintaining the status quo.
Yes,
Don't rock the boat.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
interesting. Very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It was funny.
Now, talk. We'll go back to something you said earlier too about you and your recognition of education. Now you're in academia. Are you discovering there that there's another hurdle you have to overcome if you want to maintain a job within academia?
Yes, this was interesting because I was on a grant funded position, so the grant had to be renewed every year. And I think,
Right.
as for reasons I shared earlier, the grant, the project was highly successful, best placement rate in the state of California the entire time I managed that program. And but here's the challenge: there was a full time position that was opening up at that office, in the career office, and I wanted to apply for it. And so I talked to my boss and I said, "Hey, I'd really like to apply for that. Then it's not a grant funded position. It's got a little more stability." And she says, "Okay." She says, we're looking for someone who can speak Spanish." And I said, "Well, I minored in Spanish. I can speak Spanish." And she says, "No, we're looking for someone who looks like they can speak Spanish."
Seriously.
100%.
Oh my gosh.
100%. And which reminds me of similar conversation at SeaWorld. I was working in food services human resources because it's such a large organization. The operations staff had their own HR, food service had their own HR, so on and so forth. And there was a promotional opportunity to go into the main human resources. And I interviewed for that position. I've got now 5 years of experience, I have a master's degree. I thought I'd be very well qualified. And then I didn't get that job and I was perplexed. So I go back up and meet with a person I had interviewed with. And this is actually one of the reasons I ended up leaving SeaWorld. I'd kind of hit the proverbial glass ceiling. And so I said, because the individual who got hired did not even have his bachelor's degree finished and he had zero experience in HR. And so I was completely perplexed. And and he was African American. So when I
Wow.
go there, and I didn't notice the color being an issue, I was looking at qualifications. And so as I was chatting with my colleague, I said, "So did I really blow the interview? Did I do something wrong? Like, I thought it went pretty well." And they're like, "No, yeah, you did great." I'm thinking, so then why, with my qualifications, did I not get that opportunity? And she hedged and hawed and tried to avoid the conversation. And finally, what she ended up saying is, "We needed someone who fit better into the picture of the office." And I'm thinking, what is the picture of the office? And that's all the information I got. And then I left scratching my head, and I went back up there one day and I saw the picture of the office. The picture of the office was all white women. And in the spirit of diversity, they were needing to diversify. And whether it be affirmative action or whatever might have drawn that
Right.
decision.
Now, what
I do
at that point in
Right.
time, Maureen, was the affirmative action program alive and well in America?
Oh, yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so people were looking for statistics to prove that they had the right mix of individuals.
Yeah.
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 So I think
And
that's something, and I'm learning this from talking to people from other countries. That's something that doesn't exist in other countries. Other
right.
countries have never, ever tried to achieve affirmative action through their hiring process. Now, part of that is we're the most diverse culture in the world.
Yes.
You've met
Yes.
Matthias, right? From
Yes.
Argentina. He says,
Uh-huh.
Larry, we're not diverse. We don't have those.
Exactly.
And I thought, that's an aha moment for me.
Yes.
So,
Exactly.
I think what we're doing now, and I really appreciate you sharing this is going to help the foreign students gain a greater appreciation for why we are such a unique business and workplace culture in the world.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a mixed blessing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's nothing I've never written about it. I haven't blogged about it. I have shared both of those situations where I literally did not get opportunities I wanted because I was a white woman. And I speak and talk about diversity and resilience, and so I understand it. It
Uh,
still hurts
oh yeah.
sometimes,
Oh yeah.
and I understand it. It's definitely a mixed blessing.
I'll tell you
Um,
a real quick anecdote. I was a finance executive with a company called American Hospital Supply Corporation, and they sent me to Milledgeville, Georgia, and this was back in the 70s. And I didn't realize that the attitudes towards Black was alive and well and not in a positive way in Milledgeville, Georgia. And so I'm
mhm.
recruiting for accountants. I'm the controller of the company, and I'm recruiting for, and I found an extremely bright Black female who I hired. And then I went to the guy who found me a house and I said, I've recently hired a young lady and she's looking for an apartment. Can you recommend something? Larry, I'd be happy to help you. So he gave me 2 or 3 apartment places. He went to everyone and everyone was full.
Hmm.
And she came back in tears. And she decided not to accept the job. And then I got a call from my boss in California. He said, Larry, you're not there to solve the civil rights. And I said, it never occurred to me that that's what I was doing.
Wow.
I was completely innocent. I was just hiring the best candidate that I had interviewed. She was a very bright accountant. Went back to Atlanta, Georgia and got a great job, which
Wow.
not in Milledgeville, Georgia. So I certainly appreciate what you're talking about. And that was, that was, I was 27 years old. I thought I was pretty experienced, and that just really blew me away, Maureen.
Yes. Right. Because when you come at life and business and work from the mindset of it, and it's still relevant today, even more relevant today, unfortunately, because I don't think we've made as much progress as we should have.
Yeah.
But when you come at it from a spirit of inclusion and diversity and looking for the best person for the job, you don't see color, you don't see
No.
disability, you see ability, and you see the right person. And so I just recently hired a young woman who is she is Black and she's disabled and she's amazing.
Yeah.
And
And you'd put the last quality first. She's amazing.
she was amazing. She
And
is
she
amazing,
happens
right?
to be Black and
And
disabled.
she happens to be, yeah. And I'm glad,
Oh my gosh, that's so
but
sad. Yeah.
yeah, the first conversation I had with her, I'm thinking, I need to hire you.
Hmm.
And because she'll be a fantastic addition to the team.
Right.
But yeah, it's sad to see where we have devolved to, because we have
Yeah,
not evolved, we have
no.
devolved. And that's a whole,
So let's get back to SDSU. How long were you there?
I was there about 5 years also. I think for a while I was just on this 5-year rotation.
So
'Cause-
where did you go from SDSU?
so where I went was, I went to a professional association. Now it was a not, so I go from corporate America to academia to nonprofit, essentially.
Okay.
It's a professional association. It was then called the American Society for Training and Development. And I
Okay.
was, since I was working in training and development at SeaWorld, that's when I got involved with that organization in the
Okay.
local level. So I had become a chapter president back in 95 and was very active in that professional association.
Mhm.
And because I was chapter president, I received a letter one day, um, advertising 2 jobs for the association, 2 full-time positions where I'd previously just been a volunteer at the local level. So this was for the national headquarters in Washington, DC. One position was the director of membership, and the other was for a regional manager. And I need to pause that conversation for a second because I have to email someone because I was going to have a small team meeting at 2:30, but there's other people that are like, no, I didn't have this on the calendar because we confused ourselves between yesterday and today.
Okay.
I mean, today and tomorrow. But so let me email them and let them know that.
Oh, do I need to pause or stop the recording?
No, I'm going to, because there's already other people that can't come. Let's see. I'm just going to send a quick email.
So I'm going to ask you a question while you're doing that.
Yeah.
Are these videos easy to edit afterwards so I can kind of?
I don't
Because
know.
I was
That's
on
not
a-
my strength.
Okay, my daughter is. That's why I'm using her account. She's going to help me edit. I was just wondering how difficult it
It'll download as an MP4,
was. Okay.
which is just a video file. And if you're good at editing videos, then it's probably
She's not only good, she's excellent.
perfect. That's fantastic. I need someone like that.
You met her
Yes.
when you had your 10-year anniversary. You met
Yeah.
Brianna. She's the one who was the beauty queen.
Did I ever send you pictures from that?
I believe you did. Yeah, you sent several.
Great pictures of your family from that one.
Yeah,
All right.
we had a great time, and my daughter said she really enjoyed meeting you, so it was fun.
It was fun to see your family there. Yeah, coming up on a 1-year anniversary of that party soon.
It's a year past so quick.
Oh my goodness.
But this is a year we all want to see behind us too.
That's for sure. That's for sure. So let me get back to the letter I received.
Okay.
Now, there's another weird time of my life where I was pregnant with my second child.
Okay.
In a not so great marriage where I felt like, and for much of my marriage, I was a single mom before I was ever literally a single mom, just because he was not a supportive husband
Uh-huh.
in many ways. But so I was the one, I'd take the kid. I had one child. I would take him to school, drive like a crazy person with my hair on fire to get to the university on time. I would do my job, and then I would always stay later because I did that.
Right.
I was the only person in the office at 5:30.
Hey, you were setting a bad example for everyone else.
Yes, I was told that. Like, Maureen, go home. Like, well, I got to finish this, I guess. But anyway, so life was full-time work, full-time mom, as best you could, take the kid to daycare or whatever. And so as I was pregnant with my second child, I was thinking, I don't want to continue this crazy lifestyle. And is there a way for me to have a little more flexibility in my life? So before I got the letter, actually, it was even before I got this letter, I was just thinking, you get this voice in your head telling you it's time for change. So I met with my boss, and my husband didn't even know I was going to meet with my boss because I was thinking, is there a way I can have a little more flexibility? So I set up a meeting, my heart's pounding, and I thought, I finally sit down in her office, and she was one of those not so organized individuals. Her desk literally had papers on it this high, the entire span of the desk. And she was a short person, so I could only see like this much of her head. and and I said, okay, so my heart is pounding because I knew I wanted to explore something important to me. And I sat down with her and I said, so, I'm pregnant with my second child. Is there any way I wanted to chat with you about having some flexibility in my work? Could I work from home one day a week and do administrative stuff? Could I job share and go half time? Is there something I could do to have a little more flexibility? Because life is really challenging now and it's getting more challenging. And she looks at me in the eye and she says, no, she says, we don't change jobs for the needs of the individual. We change jobs for the needs of the organization. And this organization doesn't need your job to change. That's a quote. It's emblazoned on the back of my skull. And so I was in her office about 4 minutes or so. That was the entire conversation. Clearly, there wasn't an opportunity for any more dialogue. It was very clear. So I left the office, and you would think that voice in your head would be squashed, but no, of course not.
No, it would be yelling. For me, it would be yelling.
Yes.
Get the hell out of here.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of was. But so then later I go out to dinner I'm ruminating. I'm thinking, well, that didn't go well. What else could I do? And I thought, this is now 23 years ago because I was pregnant with my daughter and she's 23. So I always know when that happened, right?
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking, how about if I start my own business? I could work from home and create, revenue for the family and so forth. So I go out to dinner with my husband and I said, so honey, we're expecting our second child. I'd like to be able to have more flexibility so I could be there for the kids and contribute to the family income. How about I start my own business? And he says, no, as long as you're married to me, you'll never have your own business. He says, I don't care if you make $20,000 a year, if that's all you make, and then we can budget for it but I don't want you making 20,000 one month and zero the next. But I was thinking, I think I'm okay with 20 grand one month and zero the next. Because on average, that's 10 grand a month. That might be doable.
Right.
So anyway, but
okay, so these two doors slamming, were they in close proximity to one another?
They were within weeks of each other.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh.
Yes.
Maureen.
And so, but that's, when a couple doors get slammed on you, then all of a sudden I had this moment of clarity in life where I said, and right there at dinner, I said, okay, well, then here's what I want. I want to be able to work from home on a full-time salary and maybe travel a bit to a region I might support. And he laughed at me, of course, not with me. And he's like, who's going to pay you to work from home on a full-time salary? I said, I don't know, but someone will. And then about 2 weeks later, I get this letter in the mail advertising those two jobs. One was in Washington, D.C., and one was exactly what I had described. It was a regional manager working from home, representing the Western states for this organization. It was just, talk about, the secret or manifestation or whatever you want to call it, getting clarity. It was eerie how much it was clear that this job was meant for me.
Well, that saying, when one door closes, another one opens.
Yeah. So the funny part of this is I took that job posting to my boss and I said, hey, I want to let you know I'll be applying for this position. And we were standing in the hallway. I can still see it. I hand it to her. She reads it. She hands it back to me. And she says, I only have one question. I said, what's that? She says, when can I post your job? And she meant that as in, this is what you want. This is exactly, it was not it was not negative. It was more supportive, actually.
Right.
That I can't keep you here anymore. And
Right.
I interviewed for that job as a regional manager when I was 7 months pregnant. I was very pregnant. There's a whole nother set of stories that go after that.
I'll bet there are.
Sometimes you just can't get in the way of fate, perhaps.
Yeah.
But so that ends up being the next career transition from academia to nonprofit, working for a
Okay.
membership organization, which is yet another culture shift. But what's important about this culture shift is that's when I started working from a remote office 23 years ago, before it was before everyone was doing it, quite
Right.
literally, right?
Right.
So I have learned so much about the American workplace, but the American workplace from a virtual perspective of you have to be your own tech support, and you have to learn how to work on a virtual team, and how do you build communication, how do you build relationships virtually is something I've been doing for over 2 decades now.
So over time, there had to be technology changes that enabled you to be able to work from home remotely.
Oh,
What were
absolutely.
some of those changes that occurred?
Oh my gosh, let's see. A VPN. It might seem pretty simple or basic nowadays, like, oh, a
Right.
VPN. But to be able to have email that you're connected to a network. I mean, for a while there, it was you weren't connected live. You'd have to, now that I think back, we had Outlook on our desktop, and you would
Right.
have to download all the emails, reply, and then upload them. And it was slow. It was dial up, right? It was
Right.
super slow. And it would just stop working on you. All that still happens nowadays, but when the Wi-Fi goes out, but it was all wired. It was and I was in a different time zone, so whatever technical support there was at national headquarters went home at 5 o'clock, which is 2 o'clock for me. So
Right.
if you run into technical challenges at 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, you just have to figure out how to fix it yourself, right? You
Right.
aren't going to be able to call anyone. So as a result, I got pretty good with technology
Right.
because I had no other choice.
Out of necessity.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But one of the most important things I learned, well, two important things I learned about working virtually, and it's still very relevant today. One is easier than the other, but first is building team, right? Building a cohesive team virtually. There were four of us that got hired within the span of 6 months to work in these remote offices around the country, because the organization decided to put their chapter support team out in the field. Imagine that. Um, and there's a lesson about the new CEO later. But so we all got hired within 6 months of each other, but we were able to create a very cohesive and well working team virtually because we had regular communication. We had, back then conference calls, no video calls,
Hmm.
but communication was active, it was regular, it was frequent. And so the four of us actually, and we all ended up working in these roles for almost 10 years.
Wow.
And yeah, none of us left until the new CEO came. And you'll love this. Talk about leadership and culture change is the person who hired all four of us. I'm still very good friends with. She's the one I interviewed with when I was pregnant, and she was a very open and inclusive leader. That was her leadership style, was to say, "Hey, there's always ways to figure out a challenge,"
Hmm.
and really fostered building a virtual team. Well, when a new CEO, and she wasn't even CEO, she was just director of membership, right? But when the turnover happened of the executive leadership, the new CEO comes in, highly technical guy, and this was has always been confusing, and he's still CEO of the organization today. Wow, long time. But anyway, he said at an all staff meeting, and the four of us flew in from our different places, and we all went to this all staff meeting. The four of us are sitting together in one row, and the CEO says, I don't like virtual offices. I don't want anyone to work virtually. I want everyone to be here under the same roof. And whoever is virtual is not going to be virtual anymore. And the four of us look at each other like, wow, welcome to the organization.
Right.
And we had all been in our roles for about 9 years at that time. And
Hey.
so we were all given the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. And that conversation lasted about 3 or 4 minutes also, like, hey, we'll pay for your relocation, you can move from San Diego to Washington DC. And I'm thinking, no.
No, absolutely not.
I didn't tell them that. They said you have 3 months to tell us your answer, and I thought, okay, I'll tell you in 3 months. I mean, I knew in 3 minutes, but to manage the time and transition. So I told them, in 3 months that I was not going to take the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C., and got a severance package. And essentially that's what helped me start my business.
Okay.
Was
Now,
that was my exit strategy.
during that time, were you pursuing your PhD
Nope.
yet?
I
Okay.
didn't start that till 2000. Well, it took 4 years, and I got it in 2012 is when I started my bachelor, my master, but my doctorate, whatever one
Okay.
it was.
Okay.
So 2012, I launched my business in 1995.
All right.
Was it 95? No, 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 no. That's wrong. That math
That
is wrong.
that would have been 25 years ago.
I launched my business when I left ATD. I think it was what, 2000? No, it was only 11, 12 years ago when I
Yeah,
went full
because you
time.
celebrated your 10-year anniversary last year, so that make it 2009, right?
Yes, it was 2009, right in the armpit of the economy.
Right, right.
The Great Recession was
Timing's
going on.
timing's everything.
Yes, it is. And it's funny is I went into that not really fully aware of the recession because well, 10 years previous to that, when I was pregnant with my daughter and had that conversation with my boss and my husband, the voice in my head to start my own business never went away.
Gotcha.
But I was working from home and on a full-time salary. And when you're working from home in a virtual office, it's almost like you have your own business, except you don't have to sell, right? You just have
Right.
someone paying you on a monthly basis. So that scratched that itch for a while until that transition with the new leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I took the opportunity to say, I've got a little nest egg that I could utilize in this transition to start my own business. And
Good for you.
yeah, yeah. So that was it. And I'd been working from home for a decade. I hate to tell you, I think I'm scarred for life. I never want to have to go back to a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 thing. No,
And working for
no.
someone else.
And working for someone else. Yeah, I know.
Well, good for
So,
you.
yeah,
Well, one of the
yeah.
things we haven't touched on a lot, but you've kind of hinted at it, is along the way, uh, have you seen an evolution in what I would call good management styles and practices?
Um,
So I'll give you an
Sometimes.
example. With my
Mhm.
career, initially, well, obviously in the Navy, it was command and control. That's the way it is in the military. But then when my first job, as what I would call as a civilian, I had a very, very understanding, probably the best boss in my opinion I ever had.
Mhm.
But then the next one, when I went to PepsiCo, was just the opposite. I mean, it was definitely command and control. There was a really strict hierarchy, and you were nobody until you reached level 14 in this organization, and it went all the way up to 36. And I mean, it was just buttoned up. I love the environment because I mean, you were as good, just like a professional athlete, you were as good as your prior year. And if you weren't delivering results, I'm sorry, this year wasn't good. You're not going to be here anymore.
Mhm.
So a lot of things have changed from the command and control to more of an inclusive, teamwork oriented culture. Uh, have you noticed any changes similar to that? Or because you
Not
were changing
consistently.
it, probably because you were changing different kinds of environments, right? It really, those were different.
Yes. Yeah. And what's interesting, and since now what I do quite a bit of is leadership development, is I think of my boss at the university who was very dictatorial, for lack of a better term.
Right.
And I see the transition in leadership at the professional association that went from open and inclusive to hierarchical and not so inclusive, and it
Right.
was almost not quite as bad as command and control, but probably pretty close.
Okay.
The challenges, and now having worked with large corporations like Boeing and Microsoft and large enterprise organizations, is I don't I I don't know if I've seen an evolution in leadership, because it changes from one culture to another, and it is such an individual thing,
Hmm.
right? I see, for example, Gary Ridge from WD-40, who to me is an amazing leader of a pretty nice sized organization.
Right.
He talks about his tribe, and he's inclusive, and he's built a wonderful culture, but that's because he has driven that. And you see such dramatic shifts in culture based on who's in charge as a leader. And if they are not an evolved leader who has given a lot of thought to their own growth as a individual, and as and their role as a leader, are they inclusive? Are they flexible? Are they inspirational even? Do they Can they delegate? Or
Right.
does it all have to go through them? Um, I For a while, I have to say, for a while, yes, I was thinking there's been an evolution in leadership, and then I see things like what happened with Boeing, what's happening in our own country right now, and I hate to say it, I don't know if there's been an evolution or a devolution, or if it's just so inconsistent across enterprises and organizations.
So what I hear
I
you
don't know.
saying, I think, Maureen, is it's not so much as a wave of change across organizations. It's really how an individual chooses to lead that affects it. So there's all these management books that are written, but there doesn't seem to be a set of standards that says this is the way leaders should behave. It sounds like what you're
Absolutely. In fact, that's almost, I have to tell you, a couple years ago, I had the great honor and pleasure of traveling to Ethiopia to work and facilitate leadership development for Ethiopian Airlines. I was
saying.
there for 3 weeks. And at the end of,
That's
so I did 4 classes there.
that would be interesting.
Oh my God, it was amazing. I still just couldn't pinch myself for that opportunity. It was fantastic. At the end of one of the classes, we did four 3-day classes with about 30, 35, 40 people in each class. But at the end of one of them, as we're talking about the different tools and resources and models and books that are out there, this one person, they'd never had leadership development ever. And these are our leads who were working on the airplanes, and as cabin crew and mechanics and so forth.
Right.
One woman raises her hand and she says, I have a question. She says, if there's so many great thought leaders out there, and books and ideas on how to be a great manager and great leader, why are there so many bad ones out there? And I thought, here, this is your first leadership class ever. And that's such an important question. Yeah, there are all these, I guess you'd have to read the books and take them to heart and change who you are as a
Right.
leader.
Well,
But
another way to look at that too is why are there so many different leadership books? Period.
right, because there are no standards. Yeah.
Or
And
or are they just rewording the same practices over and over again and calling it a different animal?
I think that's what's going on. I don't know who was it that said, I don't know who said this, but there are no new ideas, right? Really.
Yeah.
Not when it comes to leadership. I think they are just recrafted, rebranded. And maybe, do we look back to over the history of, going from the agrarian society to the knowledge society we're in? Has there been an evolution? Yes, on a very large macro scale,
Right.
sure there has, but we're not done. We have a long way to go.
Well, that brings up a point too, Maureen. Was it the change in the workplace that occurred as a result of going from that agrarian to the knowledge and service sector? Is that what changed the leadership styles that were required to be successful in those different environments? So, for example, when Ford started an automated production, you know, the management of piecework on an assembly line was different than trying to process knowledge in today's environment. So there's so many factors. I guess there's good reason why things have evolved from where we are in the workplace, but not necessarily where we are in the management side.
And I think where we are today with COVID and quarantines and global pandemic, that this will be another turning point, because it's challenging people, both individual contributors who are knowledge workers. And I say knowledge workers because you can work from home. And there are individuals that cannot and will not work from home because they're in manufacturing or they're in the front line of food service or coffee shops or whatever their job requires them to be in person. But those who are more on that knowledge worker side, who can take their laptop and go home and plug in and be on Wi-Fi and still be very productive, I think the change that we're experiencing is that from individuals who struggle to work from home to leaders who struggle to build a cohesive team, all even though you're all virtual, it's going to be another challenge to people in their role as leaders to say, first of all, do you have the self-discipline to do your job, and do you have the foresight, the emotional intelligence, the spidey sense, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
to reach out to a team member who might be struggling and is not going to tell you they're struggling.
That's a good point because I come from the service sector. And obviously, in our sector, you have to have people on the premises to serve food.
Yep.
So it's very different. I've not been in just the knowledge sector, so that would be interesting. And that's why I'm so anxious to learn from other people what they've experienced and why they've experienced. If you were to portray a picture, this will be my last question. If you were to
Okay.
portray a picture of the future, what would the things that you'd like to see change, create a more inclusive work environment? And what do you think will be changing to the workplace environment that we should be aware of? Because there's going to be jobs that are going to go away and there's going to be new jobs that are going to evolve. So if you're talking to the students today and you're saying, okay, this is what I'd like to see happen, so it's an inclusive environment, these are the things that I think are going to disappear because we don't need them anymore. And COVID is driving some of these changes faster than we ever thought they'd occur. And these are the things that you need to have in skill sets or in your quiver to be successful. Big question.
Yeah, big question. The What needs to change, and I think part of this is driven by the civil unrest that we've been experiencing in the United States for the last 6 months. What needs to change is people do need to have an inclusion mindset, no matter what, right? Whether it be age, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. People are people and they are people first.
Right.
And we all need to get better at it. I mean, we all have biases, yes, and we need to put those in check and just be more inclusive. Because if we're not, we will be divided. And we've seen what division does to countries, not only our, but countries around the world. When there's a division of I'm better than you, it doesn't end up serving anyone well.
Right.
And so we all need to be more inclusive. And that starts with our own mindset, right? Our own orientation, being able to analyze where we are and our relationship to the rest of the world. And leaders, particularly, need to change their mindset so that they can be more inclusive. But part of that is that technology, right? As far as what I think needs to change, and I'm not quite sure where we are on this, but it's something I'm personally attentive to, just because having worked virtually now for over 2 decades, and now I've had to learn how to use technology and have technology be a tool for me, not to me, right?
Right.
Is that we can make technology work for us, not against us. And so what I often tell people is learn to use the tools. We have a phone here that can do amazing things, but we need to learn to use it more effectively, um, and not let it sidetrack us. But that takes some time.
Okay. Very good.
Um, and I think the other thing is communication. Right? And part of this might be balancing with inclusion, but communication is, and I've written a couple of books on communication skills, right? And yet it still seems to be, when I've talked to leaders in classes, they're like, the biggest complaint employees have about their leaders is the lack of communication.
Right.
And when,
Absolutely.
as we all continue to work more virtually or be more isolated physically, communication has to increase exponentially
Hmm.
in order to not only build teams but build trust, help people feel a little more confident and secure in what they're doing, and to further the cause of whatever the organization is working towards, whether it's building airplanes or serving coffee.
Okay.
We all need to increase our level of communication.
Excellent. Maureen, thank you so much for taking the time with us. I really appreciate it. I know my students will really enjoy hearing this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Larry. It was fantastic to chat with you.